All right, we are back from our break, or at least I am. Some of you are. Next up, we have Melissa Kaelin, and I'm sorry, Melissa, I hope I pronounced your name properly there. I'm still,
Yeah.
all right. I know Melissa because she organized our local critique group, and she has been a fascinating person to have critiquing the work because she is really on the process of trying to hammer in, get it so it's closer to your message and try to get it across to the reader better. And so when she wanted to talk on revisions and related stuff, I was like, absolutely, let's add Melissa into this. So are you going to need the screen share?
Yes, thank you. Yep.
All right, let me make sure that you're allowed. Yes, you can screen share.
Okay.
I turn you over to
It
Melissa.
worked. Thank you, Martin. All right, let me try to share my screen here. For some reason, Zoom often gives me problems, so bear with me a second here. I'm going to close the chat and see. Let's see. Okay, for some reason, I'm forgetting where you find that button. Is it? Oh, there, it's right there. Duh. And I'm not set up. Okay. Bear with me a second here. Yeah, I wonder, let's see. I'm going to pop my PowerPoint into the chat. And then I'm going to try to go and see if I can change. I don't know if you would be able to share this, Martin. It's a Google Doc.
Says I need access.
Yep, I can add that real quick. So apologies here for the delay, everybody.
It's not like I gave you time for a tech rehearsal.
Right. And I've had this problem before. I should have practiced. Maybe if you'd like to talk about Mike for a few minutes while I share access, that could be cool.
All right. What else about Mike? He had a very, very avuncular style, for lack of any less appropriate term, at the Writers of the Future, spending the night there. If you didn't hang out with Mike till all hours of the night, getting his advice, you were missing one of the most important parts of the workshop. The lessons you got during the day were entirely different and good, but entirely different from the lessons during the night, because during the night, it was a direct conversation. During the day, it was a presentation like these with questions and answers, but Mike could take you on spontaneous trips of reminiscence and lessons all night long. And I never saw anyone that could outlast Mike. He was always the one shutting down the bar. Some of the bars closed earlier than others, so it wasn't that big a challenge. But it wasn't unusual to see Mike keeping us up till 3 or 4 in the morning, because Mike had a secret. That was his normal work schedule. Mike, when I grow up, I want to be Mike. Mike would wake up promptly every day at the crack of noon, have breakfast, catch up with Carol, catch up with his email, do whatever phone calls he needed to make, and take care of business and such during the day. And around 10 o'clock at night, he would start writing and write till about 6 in the morning, when no one was going to bother him unless he wanted to be bothered. I would, many times, I would have Mike ping me at night, because I can be insomniac, ping me at like 3 or 4 in the morning with questions about one of my projects, or with just basically any sort of writing stuff, or questions about things in his, there it is, questions about things in his anthologies he was working on, and so on. Let me see if I have access to, all right. So I will share my screen.
All right, thank you so much for that. I forgot sometimes my computer glitches on this.
You just tell me when to advance.
Okay, sure. Well, thanks for sharing those stories, Martin, and thanks for putting this together. I'm not one of Mike's writer kids, but I fully empathize, and I really support that whole sort of ethos of trying to lift others up and trying to help each other get better. I think there's a lot of room for new writers in every genre in every corner of the world, and I really don't think we have to compete. Obviously, we have to compete when it comes down to sales and attention. But I think that we would all serve each other well to lift each other up. And it helps us too by lifting our portfolio and our credibility and our reputation. So obviously, I'm Melissa of Kaelin. I am you can go ahead and flip the screen. I'm going to talk to you about revising to impress your readers. And I'm a published author. I also write for a living. So I have the rare opportunity to write for my day job. And I've been doing this for over a decade now, working in marketing, social media management, website, content management, and also writing articles about the people that I work with and the people that I connect with. And so recently, I was at Western Michigan University writing about faculty and students there, and I've just received an opportunity to write for the University of Michigan in the Department of Space and Climate Sciences. So I will be working with some very world-renowned professors and researchers to tell their stories. And then what I do when I write those stories too is I not only, promote them online and in anywhere I can find, even email marketing, but I also then distribute that to the press. And so media relations and getting your story in the news is also something I have a lot of experience in. But yeah, I'm a writer on the side. I haven't published quite as many works as some of the people here, but I have published a few. If you want to, next slide, bump to the next or jump to the next. So I can talk a little bit about what I have published. On the next slide here, I have the Social Gap Experiment Anthology. So this was actually a project I did during the pandemic. A lot of my publications, if you were to go to my website and check out my publications, a lot of those are poems that have been published in literary journals or short stories that have been published in literary journals. I've also been published in some anthologies. But during the pandemic, I actually had a little bit of creative block, and I found it really hard to create new stories. And, like a lot of people, I was feeling a little overwhelmed by everything that was going on in the world and having trouble maintaining the same level of productivity that I once did. So I decided to publish others instead. I have experience as an editor. And what I did when I lived in Lansing is I put out a call for art. Basically, I said, hey, are you a writer? Are you a poet? Are you a painter or a photographer? If so, and if you'd like to be published, send me your art and writing, and I will put that into an anthology, and then we'll publish this anthology on Amazon and send all the proceeds to nonprofits. So organizations like Feed America, anyone that could really help people who are struggling with their finances due to COVID or due to layoffs or the pandemic. So the Social Gap Experiment Anthology is available on Amazon. I led the project from start to finish, including creating the cover design and holding a contest for cover art in 2020. And well, actually, 2020. The years all blend together now. It is a publication of 43 different authors and artists, all in one book, and then all proceeds go to charity. I've also been published on a lot of magazine covers, writing nonfiction, and of course, I write nonfiction for a living, so that's always a good time. The trick is writing all day and then having energy left to write at night. So that's sometimes where I struggle a little bit. So, don't feel too bad if you don't have a writing day job. Sometimes envy that. So next slide. So I am going, and I think my next slide might actually be, okay, good, we're here. This is sort of the heart of my presentation, getting constructive feedback and finding writers groups. So we can skip to the next slide again. And Yeah, I've been in writers groups for a long, long time. I don't know how I did it because I used to be a very shy person. But when I was in my first years in college, I actually sought out a writers group, and I think even when I was 18. And so I went to my local library and looked for postings and looked at the bulletin board and said, "Do you guys have any writers that meet here?" And I think sometimes that's how you find a writers group. So I've been in writers groups since I was 18, and I've experienced all different kinds of formats, different types, different vibes. And I think you have to find one that works for you. But I think it's really important to find a writers group or to work with critique partners in order to improve your writing and impress your readers. I think once you start doing that, once you start sharing your work with people outside of your friends and outside of your family, as some of the other presenters mentioned, you're going to realize there are some really important points that people are making. And some of those you can be like, well, that's not really what I'm going for. And a lot of times, though, it really can help you improve your work. So impress your readers by revising well. I think, it can impact your career. I've written a full novel, and I've had it critiqued a lot, and I've made a lot of changes. And in some chapters, I did a full-scale rewrite, and the novel has not been published because I'm seeking a traditional publisher, and I'm seeking one of the big literary agencies to publish my work. And I won't settle for self-publishing because this is my lifelong goal, is to become a traditionally published author. Now, my novel manuscript, I've done the query letter. I've sent it out. I've had full manuscript requests from many talent agencies. In fact, Writers House, who I believe have worked with Neil Gaiman, and I know for sure have worked with Tom Clancy and the author of the Twilight series. The Writers House Literary Agency actually requested my full manuscript and has that sitting in their pile right now. And I think that some of the revisions that I made based on what my writers groups and critique partners had told me helped me get to that point. Now, unfortunately, I think my manuscript is still technically in the slush pile because I haven't heard anything in 2 years and I need to start querying again. But I think if you revise with the right types of feedback, I think it can advance your career. It can get you a literary agent faster, can get you a book deal faster. And there's so many things it can do for you. So think about these ways to impress your readers. The feedback is going to strengthen your story. You know what story you're telling, but your readers are the ones who are trying to understand what you're trying to get across. Appeal to your target audience. So I like writers groups where there's a variety of different writers, whether they're writing sci-fi or whether they're writing literary fiction or whether they're writing romance. It doesn't really matter to me what you're writing, because I want you to be reading my work knowing that my goal for my work is to reach as broad of a collection of people as possible. Now, that's not always possible, but if you're in a writer's group, you might have a fantasy fan in the room. And if your fantasy fan is the only one who doesn't like your fantasy book, well, you may not be speaking to your target audience. So what are you missing? Meeting reader expectations, whether it's the way that we create our book covers and the cover art, or whether it's what we say the story is about, or whether it's the questions that we set up in the first chapter, the story questions. Meeting those expectations is going to help our book either be a huge hit or a dud and a flop. And you have to think of your readers if you want to be, largely successful and hugely popular. You can it also helps you produce a marketable book that way. The more you keep your readers turning the page, and you can see in your writing groups how often people are excited to turn the page, then the better your book is going to sell. Also, know your elevator pitch. I mean, how many times have you walked into a room and said, someone has said to you, what is your book about? Sometimes I get caught off guard by that question because it comes from like my cousin or like my grandmother on my, spouse's side or something like that. And I don't know what to say, but when you know how to answer that question and say, this is what my book is about, that's your elevator pitch. And that becomes how you're going to sell your book, not only to a literary agent or a publisher if you're going that route, but also to people that you want to go to your Amazon site. So that can be really valuable too. And hooking a literary agent, obviously we talked about all the ways that getting this interest early on will help you get interest in the book itself and marketing the book. It also forces you to having, writing critique and writing partners and people reviewing your work. It forces you to defend your writing choices. How many characters did you put in the novel? Who has the main point of view? How many times are you switching point of view? Does it make sense? Is it manageable? We all as writers, one of the things I love about writing fiction especially is that you can make all of the choices for every single page and you get to make them the entire time. You are in complete control of what this book is going to say. So whether you choose a really outlandish character name and people are like, no one will believe that was her name, or that's going to distract them the entire novel. You can't use that name. Or whether you're creating a wizard that looks a lot like Harry Potter and someone feels like you're becoming a copycat. Those are your choices about your writing. And when you find out that you can defend them well to your peers, then I think it helps you make a case for your work, not just for your peers, but also for buyers and readers and publishers too. And escape the slush pile. I am trying really hard to escape the slush pile. The mistake that I've made is I've stopped at writing one novel and only gotten 3 chapters into my second novel. I think it's because, unlike a lot of writers, I'm an extrovert and I don't sit down with my butt in the chair enough. But, if I use more of that feedback, if I wrote a second novel, knowing everything I do now that I've learned from my critique partners, I think it would help me climb the ranks and I was getting full manuscript requests from really big people, really big agencies on my first novel. So if I were to try again, just imagine the results. All right, next slide. All right, understanding what's at stake. I put this slide in because I love this question. What is at stake in your story? That becomes so important for writing a story that sings. What does the character stand to lose or gain? We have to think about that as writers. But what do you stand to lose or gain? What's at stake for you? I think it's important to understand what's at stake for ourselves as the writer too. Are you writing a story that no one will ever read? Are you publishing something to Amazon that only 4 people are going to buy? What's at stake? Does that matter to you? Is that important? Maybe it's not. I first self-published a poetry collection and I was secretly kind of hoping no one would see it. So there wasn't much at stake for me in that process. I just kind of wanted to put my words into the world and see who secretly discovered it. But a lot of times there's a lot at stake, especially when you consider the money. So let's skip to the next slide. Or jump. I keep saying skip. As writers, we should have careful word choices, right? So why critique your work? And we've talked about this a little bit but there's some great reasons to seek feedback. You want your storytelling to resonate with people. Yeah, even in the world and of course, I like to write more literary fiction, though I have done some magical realism and created a magical raccoon who steals light from the sky and things like that. But even when you're writing fantasy, you don't want your fantasy book or your sci-fi book. And I should say sci-fi because I think that's a lot of the writers here. Even when you're writing your sci-fi book, you don't want it to look like every other book out there. You want it to be unique. You want it to resonate with people. You want to have characters that people care about and they care what happens to them. Why critique? It can also help you balance what is fact, what is fiction, and what's fantasy or what's science fiction. And by this, I mean, I've met some writers who are writing memoir, and when you're writing memoir, you run into a lot of questions. Does everything have to be the exact truth? If I don't remember this situation exactly as it happened, can I put that in the novel, or can I make stuff up? But also, we've Martin is, as he mentioned, in my writers group, the Grand River Writers Guild. And we had this question come up in our group. It was either last week or the time before, where, okay, what's fact? Are you writing a historical work of fiction? And did that character that you just put in the book, did he really do all that stuff? So, having someone critique can really help you determine, okay, yes, that's fact. Yes, keep it all as factual history. And yes, you can also have, the fictional characters beside them. But it helps you balance that too. Like maybe you could exaggerate a little or push the truth, or, make this bootlegger from the 1920s fall in love with your protagonist who's completely made up. Maybe that's okay. Why critique? It'll help you find inconsistencies. And I'm guilty of this. With a lot of novel writing, we have pantsers and we have plotters. And the plotters have a very careful plan of where they're going to go. And the pantsers are running by the seat of their pants, and they don't know what's coming next. And they love the surprises as much as readers do. Guilty, I'm a pantser. But that makes me also guilty of some inconsistencies, because I was just running with the story, running with the characters, following them around. And then I forgot that, oh yeah, he doesn't actually ever wear orange hats. I said that in chapter 2. So he can't wear an orange hat now unless it's a complete change of character. And of course, that's a silly example, but you can probably think of ways that this applies in your own revision. Catch missed opportunities. Maybe you had a really, really cool sentence about a really cool turn of events, or, bending of the law of physics or something like that in your story. And your readers latch on to that sentence and say, whoa, what does that look like? How does that happen? They can say, hey, I think you missed an opportunity here. You need an entire chapter about that. Which is always fun when people really love your writing that much. You also have to remember that by the time you're done writing your book, you're going to give away control to your reader. So in my writers group, I really try to prevent people from asking too many questions as we go, or from interjecting. So we'll be talking about this chapter that all of us read, and the writer will, they'll hear 2 sentences of someone else's feedback, and then they'll say, oh no, that's not what I meant. That's not what I meant. You're not going to be sitting right beside your reader when they're holding your book at home. You're not going to be there to say, that's not what I meant. At some point, you have to give that book to your reader, and you give away control. So whatever you've written on the page, those words are the only thing that they have to go by. And you can't clarify. You can't say, it was a slip of word choice. You can't say, well, that dialogue line belonged to the other person. So we have to be ready to give our book to the reader and to relinquish that control. And then it's their own imagination that takes over. Next slide. Okay, so what feedback do you want? I think this is important to think about with your writing goals. And you may not want to join a writer's group. Maybe it's that you don't love talking to large groups of people. Maybe it's that you don't feel ready, or maybe you're working on the first draft. A lot of people really recommend, okay, if you're on that first draft, don't show it to anyone yet. Get that whole first draft down before you let people tell you how to change your story. So you may not need a writer's group. You may need something else. There are different ways that you can have your writing critiqued. One of them is beta readers. So, and there are advantages to each of these. So beta readers is usually when you give your entire story to someone, or maybe even just an entire section or chapter, or your entire novel, and they read it from front to finish, start to finish, front to end, front cover to back cover. And then you get all of that feedback from that one person, at once usually, or if it's a really big project, you might get that feedback coming into you every Friday for a couple months or something like that. There is some real advantages to that. You can get your feedback much faster when we're talking about novel writers. You can also, you're also hearing consistently from one person. And another thing that happens in writing critique groups when you're reading each other's work is that you sometimes have to wait at least a week before you can talk to each other again. Sometimes it's once a month. And so when you have a beta reader, you're not necessarily going to have that lag between chapters. People aren't going to forget the characters or the plot line or get confused about what happened last time. So beta readers may be a good way to go. It may be that you need a beta reader more than you need a critique partner or writer's group. Another good reason to do a beta reader is when you're right at the end of your novel, right at the end of revision and everything, you feel like it's perfect and you just want to get one good read to see if there's any really consuming mistakes. Sensitivity readers are another thing you can do. We obviously 2020 and in fact several of the last decades have forced us to think about disparities and ethnic differences and different ways that people are discriminated against. And the truth is, and I follow a lot of literary agents on Twitter, so the truth is agents want diverse work. Publishers want diverse characters, diverse cast in their books. But as you write that, you need to think about those diverse characters and how you're showing their point of view. So having a sensitivity reader can really help you get a values check on what you're putting into your book, if it makes sense. Reach out to someone who's of that ethnicity. To see if it feels authentic and to see if their voice is being accurately represented. In my first novel, which is really just a manuscript at this point, I wrote about Eskimos. Of course, now we call them Inuits. And at the time, for some reason, I didn't realize that when I wrote the first draft. So the proper term is Inuit. But because I'm writing about Inuit cultures, I should really reach out to an Inuit person for a sensitivity read on how I'm incorporating their folklore and some of their history into the book. And then obviously another way to critique is workshopping, going to critique groups or other types of writers groups. This can be super helpful for first impressions. This can be super helpful for polishing the work, getting input on how to market the book. You may go to a sci-fi writers group and find out that you're not really writing sci-fi exactly. There's this other subgenre that your book fits really well into. And then what are, some of your peers might, if they're really experienced writers, know what some of the hallmarks are in that other subgenre, and they might give you some tips on how to really kind of fit your book into that niche kind of corner. So input on how to market the book can be really great. Also, people might tell you, well, this doesn't really feel like YA. It feels like more of an adult novel. You need to age down your characters or vice versa. And developmental editing, and the way that my group is set up, and we're only set up to be so big, so we're not going to get huge or anything. Don't everyone join at once. But the way that my group is set up, we're really getting really thorough feedback. And I've been super impressed with the way it's going here in Grand Rapids. But that's developmental editing. That's going to help you develop the story. So next slide. Okay, what feedback do you want? And then what feedback are they giving you? You have to think about this too. There are some cases where you want to keep the feedback and make those changes. And there are some cases where you want to discard it. And there's a lot of different ways to look at it. And every writer is going to be different. And every writer is different. There's no right way to write. As I believe it was Stuart said, all writing advice is wrong. You do you. But let's think about the feedback that they're giving you. Discard it honestly, if I find a writers group where all they're doing is telling me how great everything is, it's only praise, I'm not getting much. I am a writer and an editor and a marketer and a critical thinker, and I want to know what's wrong. I want to know what's working and what's not working. So if you're only getting praise, the other thing is, if everyone in the room is echoing what the last person said, how authentic is their opinion really? Do they feel like they have to fit a certain mold? Are they trying to blend in? So I've been really proud of our writers group too, in that we don't echo each other. It was like, sometimes we do when we really strongly believe the exact same thing. And that advice was given too. If 3 readers say the same thing, then you got to believe them. But you don't want only praise or echoes. How much is that really going to push you to be a better writer? Changing the story premise. How many times have you met someone and showed them your book or your story and they said, oh, you know what I think you should do? I think you should like kill off that character and take the storyline this entirely different way altogether. That's not especially helpful. It can be if you're really looking for ideas on how to change your work, or it can be instructive if it's giving you ideas for ways to change it up or maybe plot twists. But you don't need anyone to change the story that you're writing. So I was just kind of peeking at the comments here because I love this. I'm curious. So maybe discard that advice. Is it affecting your voice, your style, or your tone? I've gone to writers groups where the very first thing they say about my very lyrical writing, and I started as a poet, so I use those descriptions, is I can't read this. There's too many descriptions. I hate it. But if you look long enough, you're going to find someone that really likes that style of writing and sees what you're trying to do with your work and understands your voice and your style. So, think about whether or not you really want to take those tips on whether to change your voice or the tone of your book and that sort of thing. The feedback they're giving that you want to keep. It'll tighten up your prose. Those line edits can be super helpful, especially if you're having word count problems. Which can make your book less marketable if your word count is too large. So that's helpful. If it inserts or removes critical scenes, like I said, maybe they saw potential in one sentence where you just went to skip to the next chapter. That can be really helpful. I have deleted and added scenes from my first novel at the advice of some of my peers. It gives the book more impact. I mean, maybe you're telling an awesome story and skirting around a social issue that you could really, really make some waves by pulling out. I've been listening to podcasts a lot about Ursula Le Guin, and it's just amazing what she's been able to do with some of her stories. So that can get more impact if you're getting that kind of advice. And you can also grow from the feedback. You can perfect skills that might be weaknesses for you, like I am really great at developing characters, I believe, but I'm not so great at some of my dialogue. So I can get stronger at dialogue based on suggestions, things like that. They can suggest similar titles or recommend reads for you that might really open your eyes to the possibilities. And then they can tell you about resources too, like we were talking about NaNoWriMo earlier, or NaNoWriMo, depending on how you pronounce it. Next slide. All right, what feedback do you want? What feedback are they giving you? And what feedback can you offer? I'm kind of looking at the time here and I don't want to go late. So I might breeze right through this slide, but feel free to read. You can have vision in your critique style too. And when I first joined writers groups, I don't think I was that great at giving advice, but I had the privilege of being a member of the Minneapolis Writers Guild in Minnesota, where I lived for 11 years. And wow, did we have some phenomenal writers. One of them had gone to the Iowa Writers Workshop. Several of them were published, very extensively, either self-published or with literary agents. And their critique style was amazing. I encourage my writers to critique with an eagle's eye. Let's not focus on, whether you should say, walk or go to. Like, let's not get so hung up on the little word choices. Yes, that's important, but think of the big picture. Think about the essential components of story, of what's working, what's not working. Trends and common mistakes is another type of feedback that, you can provide. You can show people when they're making the same errors in every chapter or overlooking certain things. And I recommend trying to reach other writers at the level that they're at too. I've had some real beginners in my groups. And I think this, feedback is valuable for them too. Don't, in the spirit of Mike Resnick, don't tell a beginning writer that they'll never make it. Try to think about where they are, reach them where they are, and give them advice that will really help them kind of raise themselves up to a more professional level. And then maybe, in 6 months when they come to group, maybe they'll be right at that level with you, and they can also, provide some of that critique in return. And balance the good and the bad. One of the reasons I have so much fun going to writers group is because I always give praise, and I always encourage everyone else to give praise. I'm not saying all praise or only praise, but tell someone what you really liked and what you loved. And please don't delete this if you're going to edit it down, because this part of the story really sung, as well as telling them what to improve. Constructive criticism is so important. And if you ask me, I would say always include at least one compliment. No one wants to come home from a writer's critique group in complete tears saying, why do I do this? Why did I share my work? I'm never showing anyone my book again, ever. No one wants that. I've definitely cried coming home from writer's group. I know how it feels. But I've had really great nights too, where I just came home like sort of on a natural high going, wow, people love this. I have to keep writing. Yeah, and think about a time when your story was read and, and sort of just completely discarded as bad writing. I mean, would you want to go back? Next slide. I love the kitty.
Yeah, he just knocked my mouth off the arm.
It's always fun when a pet visits. My dog has been jumping around in the background. So we talked about those essential components of story. That's what I like to focus on in writers groups. And next slide again, because I want to point those out to you and really call attention to those. So in writers groups, I really suggest focusing on, those things that are going to make the story so marketable and such a bestseller, and it's going to make readers so excited to pick up the book. Things like, how much setting do you have in your book? What's the setting like? Have you really built that out enough? Your characters, obviously, people love a character-driven novel, and even if your novel isn't character-driven, you can use those characters to add tension in the scenes where you don't have a fight scene or an action scene or a spaceship, launching off to a new planet. Dialogue, plot, story arc. What is the arc of the story? Does it ebb and flow? Are there ups and downs? Have you really given enough shape to the novel? When I first wrote my first book, in the very first draft, a lot of people said it was way too dark and depressing, especially in the middle section. And that's because there's a scene where the protagonist feels suicidal. And that was really good advice. I spent a lot of time trying to add light, as I say, to that part of the novel, and trying to balance the story arc so that, when the character was up against their worst time in their story, you had moments of reprieve. You had moments where there was still hope. And that can really move your readers too, when you have that balance and that arc. What's the theme? Have you put a theme into your book? What's at stake? Yeah, we need to think about what's at stake for us as the writer, because we stand to lose or gain an entire writing career. We stand to lose or gain readers, but we need to think about what the protagonist, what the MC stands to lose or gain too. And then, is it consistent? So yeah, actually ready for the next slide. I think Kitty maybe moved it forward. Some feedback to improve a book. I know I called this session revising to impress your readers, and I really do think that happens through sharing your work and getting feedback and making those revisions. But here's a few things that you could do too if you just want to walk away from today knowing how to provide feedback, or how to revise a little bit to improve your book. Here's some common things you can do. Do a search for overused words. Maybe just look at one page of your book and figure out, okay, what was the word I used the most? I'll tell you what mine is right now. It's just. My protagonist just loves to do things. She just arrives on time, and she just goes to the store to come back, and she just wants to go to the mountains where she can really feel free. But if your character just wants to, I love just too. If your character just wants to just do things all the time, you might just lose your reader's attention because you just can't get the sentence across to make a point. Just make a point. Sorry, I'm having too much fun here. But look at one page of your novel and figure out what one of your overused words is, and run a search. Do a keyword search through your entire manuscript and find that word. See how many times you used it. Delete a couple. I know it's hard. Delete a couple. That way, maybe it'll just be a little easier for your reader to get to that just point. Hopefully it's a justifiable point. But anyway, the other thing that looking for overly used words can do is it can help you find phrases that you use all the time that kind of stop the show. When I said overused words and showstoppers, I didn't mean like a showstopper, like, wow. I meant, okay, this is stopping your show, slowing you down, delete that clause too. So phrases, words to eliminate. Maybe that's a repeat. I'm trying to, this could also refer to longer sort of like exposition that you don't need, things like that. A lot of common feedback is okay, you can eliminate these kinds of things. And you can do that on your own too, but beta readers or critique partners will really point it out. Do you want a timestamp on the top of every chapter? Are you doing time travel, or are you doing, eons into the future? Will it just be easier if people have a timestamp every single time, things like that? Or how are you formatting your chapters? Do they all have titles? Are they all the same length? Is your pacing similar? Things like that. Other feedback that could improve a book, different perspectives. How are your readers going to fill in the gaps? One of the things about giving up control to our story, and granted, I haven't published a full novel yet, but I've written a lot of poetry and published that, and I've performed it in front of audiences. And I've also published some short stories. And when I show those short stories to readers, they're going to fill in the gaps. So you might have a really mysterious exchange and dialogue between, a man and a woman in the start of your novel. Maybe we don't know the full story of what's going on there. That happens in my book when one of the secondary characters has a secret. This man in a man in the book who has a secret. And I had readers guess so much about what that secret is. They filled in the gaps, going all these different directions. One person thought, oh, that character is definitely gay. One person thought, oh, that character is, he's got cancer. One character thought, oh, he's been divorced. He'll never have a relationship again. People are going to fill in the gaps from their own experience. So when you give away that control to your book, you have to think about, okay, am I giving the reader enough that I'm sending them the direction I want, or leading them astray if that's what you want. Internal dialogue can really help. If you make sure that your characters are thinking to themselves, that can really help a reader root for your protagonist. Lessons you still have to learn, in critique, we learn what we're not good at, and it's not easy, but it helps us get better. So is your story length manageable? Are you writing a novel that's way too long? Are you writing a novel that's way too short? You can look online and you can kind of search for it and see what the standards are in your industry. Now, if you're self-publishing, you don't necessarily have to worry about that, but you don't really want to lose the reader before they get to the ending either, especially if it's a really good ending. You could think about, is this book so long it needs to become a series? Things like that. Pacing, tone, are there limits on your writing style, things like that. And then another common kind of thing that you can really improve on in your book is clear evidence that you're a beginning writer. If you're just starting out and you're trying to write something marketable to sell on Amazon or to get a publisher, there's certain things you should avoid. One is a dream sequence. Never start with a dream sequence, but you can find those online. So next slide. All right, I need to wrap up here soon, so I'll kind of breeze through these really quickly. The last couple of slides are more about me and how to connect with me on my website at kaelinart.com. But consider this. How much will readers love your work? Are you writing for your target audience? Are you using the hallmarks of your genre? Does your chapter 1 achieve enough? I read a great column from Chuck Wendig when he tells you the 21 things that have to happen in chapter 1, things like that. You really want to get your reader hooked. And I have some of that advice available on my website and my writing resources. The uninspected, are you using foreshadowing or plot twist? Is the ending satisfying? What do you need to do for a series? Maybe a little recap in the beginning of each book. It kind of depends. How are you going to distinguish your book from the competition? And then also in writers groups, you'll find out how you're managing either being too vague or being too extreme. So for example, I once worked with a writer who wrote such gory action scenes. There was so much blood and gut being spilled in every scene. And I don't mind reading this. I read it all the time. But this guy, all of us were in agreement. He went way to the extreme. And the consensus ended up being, you can't market this work traditionally. No one will publish this much blood and gore. So, your critique group will really tell you how you're managing extremes, or how you're managing not having enough detail and if that's going to work. And those are important things to consider. Next slide. And remember, you're the one in control. So take everything with a heavy grain of salt. When you use the feedback, think about your goals. Do they understand what I'm trying to do here? I think Stuart mentioned too that they know you need to change something. They don't know what you need to change. So really think about whether you're achieving the goals of your story. And when you're critiquing others, try to help them achieve those goals. Maybe they were going for a really boring tone for a while, trying to be kind of monotonous. Maybe they have an experimental writing style. You don't know. Decide which people you trust the most with their feedback, and maybe use the majority of their feedback and maybe take the others with a grain of salt. And know when to leave a group. Maybe you need to start your own. Sometimes, unfortunately, people can get too caught up in negative feedback, or they can really sort of focus on the wrong things, or maybe you really do need a group that is all science fiction so that you can focus on, okay, how much fuel do we need to put into the spacecraft so that it can make it to the farthest planet without running out of steam, And so if you want to be working with other writers in your genre, that's something to think about too. Next slide. All right, next slide. Just talked about that. I wasn't sure. I thought I wouldn't have enough content, so I apologize. Find a format that works for you, though. Some groups are just a support group. Sometimes you can have devoted writing time. You can read aloud and get comments, but that's only going to give you first impressions. I critique in advance. Everyone has to read the chapter in advance, and we get really careful commentary, and it's very helpful. Obviously, lectures and workshops have a different format, and fortunately, someone already talked about National Novel Writing Month, which I love. Next. All right, I think I'm about to finish up here, but keep looking until you find the right one. Next slide. And I did include some resources here. Of course, I've shared my presentation with all of you. There are lots of websites where you can find listings. There are a couple writers groups in town. The best way to find out about a writers group is to ask other writers, stand in line at conferences, talk to people about what groups they know about. So I'm sorry to rush through this, but I think we're going to finish up here. Happy to take questions or pass it back to Martin if we're out of time. Thank you, everyone. You can click through these. These are all about me. So.
We have time for one or two questions.
Okay. You are all so welcome. So I don't have to handle any questions if there aren't any. If I see any come through in the comments while the next presenter is presenting, I'll be happy to answer them in text too. Yeah. So in stores and bookstores are a great place to find listings. Look for those bulletin boards. Ask the person at the desk. I mean, a lot of times, we feel very introverted as writers. I'm one of the exceptions, but I do have my quiet moments. But you'll find out it can be very intimate. It can end up being 3 or 4 writers in a room who all know each other very well, and it's not as intimidating as you think. All right. Thanks, everyone. Back to you, Martin.
Thank you. All right, I will switch to the intermission early as I deal with a cat who is trying desperately to die.
He was helping me. Awesome.
Loves chewing on things that protrude, like buttons and tie clips, and Larry. You are a pest.
No, what he wants is your undivided attention. I have a cat like that too.
Yeah. It's not quite time for their treats. They're about an hour early for that. So, and he's not the treat monster, but he's definitely wanting attention all of a sudden. So let me switch to the intermission and see what the cat wants, and we will be back in about 10 minutes. And